This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about what happens when a system built on delay finally runs out of time. For years, we were told that accountability was coming, that consequences existed, that institutions were patient because patience was strength. But patience can quietly turn into permission. Tonight, something changed, not loudly, not ceremonially, but mechanically. A switch flipped. A process moved from theory into motion. And when that happens, the danger isn't spectacle. The danger is acceleration. Because once enforcement begins, it stops negotiating with narratives. It stops responding to outrage. It stops waiting for the temperature to cool. If you want to understand what's unfolding, not the noise, but the machinery, stay with me. This story does not slow down from here. What matters now isn't who's angry. It's who still has leverage. And that's where the system starts to reveal its fault lines. When people look for control, they look at faces, leaders, institutions, elections, courts. That's a mistake. What actually controls this system is timing, deadlines, exhaustion, procedural gravity. For decades, power learned that if you stretch time long enough, the system adapts around you. Appeals pile up, motions delay, attention drifts. Eventually, enforcement softens into negotiation. That wasn't corruption, it was inertia. But the mechanism underneath never disappeared. It waited. Because the real authority in any legal system is not judgment. It's enforcement, not the ruling, the follow-through. And enforcement doesn't care about reputation or loyalty. It responds to thresholds. When delay tactics are exhausted, discretion collapses. That's the shift we're inside right now. The system is no longer asking whether consequences are appropriate. It's executing consequences because no alternatives remain. And once enforcement takes control, personalities stop mattering. Resistance becomes data. Escalation becomes evidence. This is where the story stops being political and starts becoming mechanical. There was a time when this system moved slowly on purpose. Delay was framed as fairness. Caution was framed as restraint. Before enforcement waited for consensus, it waited for public comfort. It waited for the noise to die down. Now, the change didn't happen overnight. That's what makes it dangerous. Step by step, delay stopped working. Appeals stopped stretching time. Warnings stopped softening outcomes. What used to be negotiable became automatic, and almost no one noticed, because nothing looked different. Same courts, same language, same rituals. But underneath, the tolerance threshold shifted. The system learned that waiting did not reduce conflict. It concentrated it. So instead of slowing pressure, enforcement began compressing it. Shorter timelines, harder language, fewer off-ramps. That's not vengeance. That's adaptation. Because when a system realizes delay invites defiance, it stops rewarding delay. And here's the quiet part. Once that shift happens, there is no reset button. You don't go back to before. You only move forward into consequences that arrive faster than anyone planned for. And that's where the first shock becomes unavoidable. The shock didn't come as a speech. It came as a timestamp, a filing, stamped, final. Less than an hour later, enforcement mechanisms activated. Not debated, not previewed, activated. That matters, because this wasn't a trial court improvising. This was a higher court saying the runway was gone. Emergency relief was requested and then dismissed. With prejudice. That phrase isn't dramatic. It's surgical. It means the system didn't just disagree. It found the argument unworthy of another attempt. Within minutes, the door closed again. Outside, the reaction was immediate. Security escalated, crowds gathered, statements shifted in real time. But that reaction is not the story. It's a symptom, because what actually happened was quieter and more destabilizing. Enforcement stopped waiting for cooperation. If you're relying on television panels to explain this moment, you're already behind. This isn't about commentary. It's about process. Stay with me. Because once enforcement moves faster than response, every delay tactic turns into exposure. And the next question isn't whether pressure increases, it's where the pressure goes next. This is the part people misunderstand. They think enforcement is about punishment. It's not. It's about containment. Once a system decides that noncompliance is no longer accidental, it stops persuading and starts isolating. Money first. Access second, control last. That's how it works. Assets aren't symbolic. They're leverage maps. They tell the system who can still maneuver and who can't, who can fund delay, who can sustain resistance. So enforcement doesn't swing wildly. It narrows. Accounts freeze. Transfers trigger alarms. Ownership structures get flattened. Every layer designed to obscure control becomes a liability once monitors step in. And here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. The people who benefit from delay are not the ones who absorb its cost. The cost moves outward, onto employees, onto lenders, onto institutions that did nothing wrong except believe time would protect them. That's why enforcement escalates when it does. Not because the system is angry, because the damage is spreading. And when that happens, enforcement stops being optional. It becomes compulsory. Which brings us to the moment when pressure stops being contained and starts leaking. Then the tempo changes. Faster filings, shorter windows, less explanation, security tightens, coordination expands. Jurisdictions start talking to each other. This is what escalation looks like when it's procedural. One action triggers another, not emotionally. Automatically, resistance doesn't slow it down. It feeds it. Every threat sharpens posture. Every refusal widens authority. Every public outburst becomes a record. And the system starts planning for outcomes it hoped it wouldn't need. Physical access, protective details, contingencies. At this stage, enforcement is no longer reacting. It's anticipating. That's when pressure stops feeling legal and starts feeling structural. Because now the system is preparing for the possibility that compliance will not be voluntary. This is the point where mistakes happen. Not by institutions, by people who believe escalation creates leverage. It doesn't. It collapses it. And once that realization sets in, everything accelerates again. Because the next phase doesn't ask permission. It arrives. This is where it reaches you. Not as a headline, as a feeling. You feel it when institutions stop improvising and start hardening. When uncertainty turns into posture. When security replaces debate. Because enforcement doesn't stay abstract. It changes the environment you live in. Streets close. Buildings lock down. Politics turns brittle. And suddenly, everything feels closer together. More fragile. More combustible. You're told this is normal. That this is just another moment. It isn't. What you're watching is the cost of delayed accountability being paid all at once. Compressed, concentrated, and here's the uncomfortable truth. When enforcement finally moves, it doesn't just touch the target. It radiates outward. If you want to understand what's coming, not just react to it, this is the moment to stay engaged. To keep watching, to keep asking who benefits from chaos and who pays for it, because the system is no longer trying to persuade anyone. It's trying to hold, and the next strain won't be local. Once enforcement crosses borders, the story stops belonging to one place. Systems talk to each other. Markets notice. Allies reassess. What looks domestic from the inside reads as instability from the outside. Because the moment enforcement requires coordination, it signals stress, not failure. Stress. Financial institutions recalibrate risk. Governments quietly update briefings. Adversaries watch for distraction. This is how internal pressure becomes external signal. The question shifts from legality to durability. Can the system enforce without fracturing? Can it hold while being tested publicly? And here's the part that unsettles foreign observers the most. Not the ruling, not the assets. The escalation, when enforcement requires security planning, it introduces uncertainty into places that rely on predictability. Trade, diplomacy, investment. This is no longer about one figure or one judgment. It's about whether a democratic system can execute consequences without triggering instability. No one knows the answer yet, because once pressure globalizes, feedback loops multiply. And the next phase isn't driven by law alone. It's driven by reaction. From here, the future narrows into 3 paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. The system absorbs the shock. Enforcement proceeds. Institutions hold. Pressure is released through process. Slowly, deliberately. The second is erosion. Compliance happens, but legitimacy thins. Each step forward costs trust. Each enforcement action deepens polarization. The system works, but it weakens, and then there is rupture. Not collapse, rupture. A moment where enforcement triggers resistance strong enough to force recalibration. Where intimidation, disorder, or miscalculation alters how far the system is willing to go, none of these paths announce themselves in advance. They overlap, they blur. Adjustment can slide into erosion. Erosion can drift toward rupture. And the system doesn't choose consciously. It responds to pressure. That's what makes this phase dangerous. There is no referee, no pause button, only momentum. And momentum is shaped by the next decisions, not by institutions alone, but by how much strain they are forced to absorb. Which brings us to the last question, not what will happen, but what will be allowed to finish. There is no ending here that feels resolved, because resolution implies relief, and relief isn't what systems experience under stress. What happens next will look procedural, receipts, orders, movements. But underneath, something larger is being tested. Whether enforcement can finish what judgment started. Whether intimidation changes outcomes. Whether delay still works when time is no longer elastic. This is not about victory or defeat. It's about precedent. Once a system proves it can execute consequences at the highest level, it cannot unlearn that capability. And once it hesitates, it cannot easily reclaim authority. That's the line being approached now. If you want to understand where this goes, this cannot be the last time you engage with it. Follow the process, not the personalities. Watch the mechanisms, not the noise. Because the next chapter won't announce itself as a crisis. It will arrive as another filing, another deadline, another enforcement action. And by the time it's obvious, the direction will already be set. Stay here. Stay informed. Because once accountability either holds or bends, everything downstream changes with it. And there is no rewind.